And Bishop Malusi Mpumlwana, General Secretary of the South African Council of Churches and President of the InterFaith Forum of South Africa, joins us now for this discussion. Bishop, a very good evening to you, and thank you so much for speaking to us. I think it's probably the third or fourth year running that you and I are having this conversation around the role of interfaith missions in trying to break through the socioeconomic crises that the country is facing. And I was just listening to some comments made by politicians as we were speaking about the growing inequality. Some have even ridiculed the thought that apartheid can be seen as the original sin when it looks at the state that most of our people find themselves in. I'd just like your comment on this.
First of all, thank you very much for having me. I should say that there is no president of the InterFaith Forum. It's just a forum. I'm just chairperson. Okay. But various faith, leaders come together in a forum and they make certain observations and analyze the situation and come to the conclusion that it is necessary for South Africans to be enabled to come together in the way that we're hoping to do in the coming couple of days and have those conversations. So that's what it's about. There was a statement made recently in a different conference about generational trauma that pointed out that trauma can actually be embedded in the DNA over generations. And they were citing that you've got 400 years of colonization, and apartheid was only about just over 40 years, but overall, the whole process has been so long that it becomes ingrained in the psyche of people. But it also said that even those that came from Europe were traumatized people in their own environment. They didn't come here because it was a vacation place to come to. And so you got trauma upon trauma dealing with each other in this context over generations. And so, yes, I wouldn't say that it's apartheid because apartheid was only, if you like, one generation. But it is about the continuous, in fact, we've never been a nation as South Africa. We have yet to be that, which is why on the third day of our convening, we focus on what it will take for us to become one society, to build a South African-ness out of us.
And I'd like to follow that train of thought. Before you continue, Bishop, I'd like to follow that train of thought. We are in a democratic era or dispensation, and as you say, apartheid was only several decades, but colonization has been hundreds of years going back. So if we're to trace the DNA that bedevils a country of a continuous cycle of poverty traps, how are we to break that? Because if we're going to the polls next year, we're listening to all of these policy offerings on what will break South Africans out of this. Can we be realistic about what will break the structural nature of poverty in this country and what it will really take?
Well, that's exactly what we're trying to deal with on the second day of our conference. I mean, we learned that 99% of South Africa's poverty is between so-called Africans and so-called Coloureds. 99%, and between the two of those populations, they make up 90% of the voting population. So that's where your issue of elections comes in. But you see, the reality is that we've been excluded majority, and we have to actually deal with that. Look at the Bantu stance. This is the 1936 Land Act that determined that so-called Africans are entitled to 13% of South Africa, and that became the Bantu stance, so-called homelands. And 1994 didn't change that. And that's why you've got people fleeing rural poverty into urban squalor. And then you've got all these small dormitories around the country that are all sleepy and so on. Then you have a serious one. The Status A tells us that between the ages 15 and 24, there are more than 10 million young people. 75% of them are without hope. So something is going to give. There has to be some kind of Marshall Plan that will deal with these matters. And so that's how you deal with poverty, by bringing the excluded majority into the productive economy. And it is possible.
So the discussions that you are having, how, as the interfaith bodies, how you can help intervene, working together with obviously various stakeholders in society. I hate to ask the question, is there anything new? Because obviously with each evolution of the South African society, new challenges are presented. But I reckon we are in a different wave of democratization as a nation that needs to be breathed fresh blood into it, or fresh air into our approach.
Yes, it's not just the faith. I mean, the faith communities are the conveners, but the discussions are not discussions of faith leaders. These are discussions of civil society, of business, of community representatives, all kinds of people coming together to reflect and find solutions, because this is solutions, convening. It's not about griping and finger pointing. It's about saying, now we know this is the issue. What does this room, in all our breakaways and the panels that we're going to have, what suggestions can we have that will make a difference? And those suggestions are not about what will be done by the faith leaders, about what will be done by each and everybody, including you, where you are. So when those come out, it should be things that we each can find resonance with. We can do something about them. Yes, there will be a lot of advocacy with government, but there's also a lot that we can do ourselves. I come, just to speak for myself, from a time when we didn't even have a government that cares to listen to us. And when we started the work in the Black community programs, establishing self-help programs and getting things done, we were not hoping for a government. How much more today when there is a government that we can actually press on? So it's also some things we can do, and things that communities can do, and things that people can hold government accountable for.
And that's why I said, Bishop, what you can do as the interfaith, including with other various stakeholders, because I understand that it's a society-wide challenge that can only be dealt with society that is cohesive. But then again, as you mentioned, those things like gender-based violence, growing inequality, race-based politics that are fracturing those bonds that can unite us. What fresh approach can we use? Because we are not unaware of these problems. So more data and analysis. Yes, it's good to understand the genesis of the problem, but where is it going to get us?
Well, ma'am, I would say wait till Wednesday when we can tell you what we've come up with. I'm not going to preempt what people's thinking will be in the next 2 days, but I think it will be very robust, what will be discussed on all these matters. Of course, the first issue here is about what makes for a capable state, because a lot of the things we're talking about actually have to do with the capacity of the state to address them effectively. And so we'll spend some time tomorrow focused on what makes for a capable state, so that we can then deal with the things that depend on the state. Then the next day, we'll talk about the economic architecture that includes the excluded majority. And on the last day, we'll talk about what can make for a common South Africanness, where we can actually have values that bind us together, but we can actually socialize for and say, hey, that is not un-South African. That is un-South African. But what does that mean when we've not even identified what South Africanness is about?
And I look forward to those discussions, Bishop. we understand that part of what you may be looking at as well is different models around welfare change, multivariate analysis of that. Thank you so much for speaking to us, Bishop Malusi Mpumlwana, just speaking to us about the interfaith organizations and the discussions that are underway to tackle the various socio-economic crises here in South Africa.